This is what you all been waiting for, the 9800X3D. How does it perform in Star Citizen when it's fully tuned and fully overclocked? And we're going to compare it against its predecessor, the 7800X3D, that is also fully tuned, and the non-3D cache version, 9700X. For the testing methodology, we're pairing all CPUs with the 4090, and for the graphic settings, you can see it in the description below, but everything is maxed out to really hammer the CPUs. And as always, we begin with the Lorville run. This run is now playing in the background, so if you want to copy it yourself and compare your own results, pay close attention, run this in slow motion, and you'll be able to replicate it. And before we begin, I just want to say a big thank you to all the Discord members who have been supporting me and been hanging out in the Discord and talking about overclocking. And as always, the results you're seeing is the average of the 5 runs. To get the baseline, let's begin with the classic plug and play settings. This is when you do not touch the BIOS and just straight up install your CPU, which automatically sets the memory frequency at 4800 MHz with terrible timings. And when we compare that against the most popular Expo profile of 6000 CL30, we're seeing a massive 17 to 32% better performance. Key note there, do not forget to enable your Expo. It resets every time you make a CPU upgrade. Now for the fun part, let's tune this bad boy, and the overall experience for tuning the AM5 platform is a breeze. And I was able to achieve 6400 MHz CL30 at 2133 MHz on the FCLK. You can see that we gained a massive latency and bandwidth improvement, going from 4800 MHz to 6000 to 6400. We also did a PBO overclock and added another 200 MHz to the clock frequency. And for the results, we gain an additional 12 to 15% better performance for a much smoother and better gameplay. However, I was not pleased, because when I took a look at the previous 3.23 patch results, I noticed that the performance was not better. It was on par with the 7800X3D. But as I suspected, this was probably due to the patch 3.24 being more demanding than in previous patch. So these results would not be comparable, but it motivated me to see if I can get more performance out of the CPU. And with the latest BIOS update, it unlocked the memory voltage, and with that I went ahead and tried CL28 for the first time, and I was able to get that stable but also boost the FCLK frequency up to 2200 MHz. For all my Discord supporters in the game room, they'll get access to these timings and settings used for doing this video. So, higher FCLK, better performance, and the FCLK, it just increases the bandwidth overall and also reduces the latency just a tiny little bit. That gave us an additional 3% better performance. Comparing it against the other tuned CPUs, we can see that the 9700X is just trailing behind the 9800X3D by 5 to 10%. These margins becomes even smaller when we compare to it when it's only at CL30 with 2133 MHz. We're talking about 4 to 7%. This is just to show that every single frame matters in Star Citizen. If we didn't tune the 9800X3D, the results is like I said in my previous video of the 9700X review, if you want X3D performance today, get this CPU. And I really meant that. And as you can see, you're able to achieve very close to that tuned performance, but you're able to outperform it by over 4 to 11%. And at this point, I asked myself, is it even worth to get the X3D chip if the performance isn't that much better? And before you call me into fanboy, I was so overhyped by the 9800X3D. I was hoping for 20 to 25% better performance in Star Citizen with this X3D chip. After seeing all the mainstream tech reviews, and I'm sure you expected the same thing. But the reality is the performance gap and the performance of the CPU is actually memory bound. The X3 chip is not big enough for Star Citizen. Let me show you what I mean. What you're seeing here are two frame graphs. One is from the fastest tuned 9800X3D CL28 with the 2200 MHz, basically the fastest tune I could achieve, and one is the 9700X. Out of these two images, A or B, which one do you think is the X3D chip? If you guessed B, well, congrats, you are wrong. B is in fact the 9700X. It simply has way less stutters than the X3D chip, and that was actually my experience when I did that run for 5 times on average. I was like, this feels less smooth than the 9700X. What is going on? Well, when we reveal the top 5% and the 1% low, we can see in the 1% low that, well, it's actually very close to the 9700X. Meanwhile, the top 5% are way higher, 20%, and this is actually skewing the average results. It's getting higher highs, and that creates a higher average, but in reality, the 0.1% is virtually the same. Now, even though the X3D chip looks better on paper, if you were to compare this side by side, you would actually think that the non-X3D chip was the X3D chip if you have the bias that X3D chip is always faster. It is not, at least not in Star Citizen. Getting close to that 32 gigabytes of memory requirement, and when it's that full, well, you better have fast memory, and that's what we're seeing here. Star Citizen is a memory benchmark, so even though we're reviewing the X3D chip, we're just memory bound. If you're getting the non-X3D chips, whether it's the 9700X or the 7700X, you'll be fine. You'll be doing great. And even though this is a 9800X3D review, it's really a memory tuning review. And this has never been more evident than in this specific CPU launch for Star Citizen. You're not benefiting anything from the X3D chip in high tensed scenarios in Star Citizen. Don't get me wrong, you're still getting over 300 FPS in space when you're quantum traveling, when you are flying around. There's not much going on, but when it comes to battles and everything else, you're not going to see any difference between this and the non-X3D version. Moving on to the next benchmark we're on, Area 18, we can see that in this scene, we are revealing exactly what we saw in Lorville, but more in detail. The 9700X is actually virtually on par with the X3D chip. The only reason why it has a higher average is because it also has higher highs. Yes, you will see scenes where it prints beautiful high FPS. The overall experience is actually better on the non-X3D chip, and once again, that destroys the 7800X3D as well by over 20% on the 1% low. God damn. Alright, moving on to Orison. Orison turns out to be less demanding than the other areas, and as such, we are now seeing the 3D cache get more benefit, where it sees a 13 to 19% gains over the non-X3D chip, and another 25 to 27% better performance than its older sibling, the 7800X3D. So another wow moment there as well, and I have to say the Orison run, it was much smoother on the X3D chip. Finally, we can see here on the top 5% and also the 0.1% that we are actually seeing a massive performance delta. So yes, overall here, we do see the benefits of the X3D chip. And finally, for the summary, I'm in a particular situation because I don't have my 13900K, which is the fastest CPU for Star Citizen. It's currently being shipped from London to Dubai, and I pray to the CPU lords that it does not get smashed in the shipping. Besides that, I think the 9800X3D is both a little bit underwhelming because there was so much high expectations, but also it performs as expected. In less demanding areas, it performs pretty well, and in the most demanding scenes, when you want that stable FPS, it doesn't really get there. So it makes my recommendation dependent on what kind of user you are. On the extreme end, you love tuning 100% of the time. On the other extreme end, you're a 100% gamer. So depending on where you are, I would say get the X3D chip if you're 100% gaming and the most amount of tuning you want to do is enable XMP. That's the only recommendation there is. However, if you know about tuning or if you want to learn about tuning in my Discord below, then I would actually recommend not to get the X3D chip. And the reason why is because, well, you're spending way more money and you're not really seeing the performance when it matters. And the final question, should you upgrade from the 7800X3D to the 9800X3D? Well, it depends. If you are not going to tune your system, the answer is simply no, because there is no performance difference when you're running both of them with the same Expo settings. Star Citizen is memory bound. You should not spend money on the 9800X3D just to find out in the end that you need to tune your memory to get the performance you're looking for.